having successfully acquired a California-based logging company and moving them across to Arizona, we are pretty quickly up against some real problems here. The press are against us. Even the senators, they're not particularly on our side at this point as well.
Did you consider changing your accent?
There are advantages to me keeping my accent, so no. When it comes to good cop in the negotiating room, having a British accent always comes across well.
Let's see if I got this straight. You are a city boy in skinny jeans looking at miles and miles of pine trees, which wasn't all that stimulating. And then you put out bids to contractors and you find out very quickly it's like the mob. They wanted a piece of it and you had figured out how to bypass them. This is a tough one. Welcome back to another episode of IAG's War Room. In the trenches, M&A stories where M&A experts talk about how they fought real-world battles of selling businesses, how they ultimately won and closed the deal, or as we like to say, we won the war. I'm Joe Lieberman, Senior Managing Director of IAG. Our guest today is Martin Gillard, Head of M&A at IAG. Today's segment is called Log and Load, where pulling off a logging acquisition turns into a real-world fight. And it's a good one. So let's go to war. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Let's start off with how you got into the M&A industry.
I started life as a mechanical engineer, did one major project known as the Channel Tunnel, as a lot of people may know, and pretty quickly figured out that I didn't like being a mechanical engineer. But in that time, I'd invented some technology. And I was fortunate enough as a younger lad to sell that technology to a group of Middle Eastern business guys who turned out to be some very prominent gentlemen who, within 3 years of buying my technology, sold it on to the Chinese for 7 times the amount. So I pretty quickly figured out that I needed to be sat that side of the table rather than my side of the table. Yeah, I went to see them, had a conversation with them, and they were very good. They retrained me to become a commercial banker, investment banker, and valuation analyst. And they then set me to work touring the world, sounds grand, buying and selling businesses on their behalf. So that's how I got into the industry, and that's how I ended up over here. I'm not a native, as you can tell.
We have a couple things in common. One, I'm an immigrant too, from Canada. I'm sure you can tell from my accent. And secondly, I graduated with an electrical engineering degree. And the one thing I knew I wanted to do was to not be an engineer. So we have that in common. Martin, we have a really interesting story today. You were in an environment with a major forestry contract here in the U.S. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
As a business that acquired businesses, grew them, sold them, we were asked to bid on a major U.S. forestry project, an American federal contract for 300,000 acres of ponderosa pine based in northern Arizona, which we won to our surprise. And that was where the problems really started with regard to how we facilitate growing this business and having to buy entities around us. That we could actually deliver on this project.
So you won the contract and you were off to fulfill it. And then what happened?
I arrived in Arizona. I'm a London boy. I'm a city boy. So I thought it's a bit hot, but I could probably do this. And within 3 hours of getting in a cab and going north, I was overlooking what was to be my office for the next 7-8 years. And I was staring at nothing but ponderosa pine trees. There was not a building in sight. That's the first thing. I mean, what have I done? Why did I agree to come over and deliver this project on behalf of the company?
Right. There's no street noise. There's no sirens. There's no coffee around the corner.
There's no skyscrapers.
Right.
I'm looking over just pure trees as far as the eye can see from left to right. 300,000 acres. But we spent 6 weeks locked away in some offices in London, and we figured out the forestry industry was running on subsidies. And this is all about fire abatement. How do you thin forest to stop the spread of wildfire? We'd done some modeling, and we actually figured out that all we needed was $27 million worth of private money, which raised a lot of our eyebrows in Washington.
Were you able to sell off the inventory? Is that how you ran the numbers?
we were producing tons and tons of ponderosa pine. And we got involved in other things such as soils, etc. We quickly figured out, even without the subsidies, with about $27 million worth of private equity money, private money from our shareholders, we could make this work. Okay. And therein lies the first problem. We pretty quickly figure out you don't have any commercial logging industry, no commercial sawmills, nothing. A few small logging companies, a little bit of logistics, some small sawmills. And we bought this contract and the clock was ticking. So I put out a tender for loggers. And being the outsiders, we weren't particularly welcome. We received the tenders back and they were virtually all the same price. They end up colluding. We weren't welcome. The price wasn't what we could afford to pay. We were immediately under pressure from the US Forest Service. So we had to do something quickly. So we went to California and we bought a logging company and shipped them over. Then the next problem is, well, we don't have a sawmill. The only one we could find was way over east. We had to pay more than what we had to, but we had to have a sawmill so we could turn the logs into lumber. And then in the middle of that, we put out a tender for logistics for people to take the logs from the forest to the sawmill. And what did all the logistics people do? Exactly the same.
Okay. All right. So let's see if I got this straight. You are a city boy in skinny jeans looking at miles and miles of pine trees, which wasn't all that stimulating. And then you put out bids to contractors to help you cut down the logs. And you find out very quickly it's like the mob. They wanted a piece of it, and you had figured out how to bypass them by effectively buying another company that was out of state. But didn't you run into problems with the resources to cut down the logs and the operations and the logistics of it?
Having successfully acquired a California-based logging company and moving them across to Arizona, which didn't go down well in the local press for obvious reasons, we're taking locals' jobs. We are pretty quickly up against some real problems here. The press are against us. Even the senators, they're not particularly on our side at this point as well.
Did you consider changing your accent?
There are advantages to me keeping my accent, so no. When it comes to good cop in the negotiating room, having a British accent always comes across well.
Well, it sounds like it was very exhausting, and now you're facing a mountain or a pile of logs of problems. So then what did you do?
Obviously, we have the logs. We're going to need to cut them eventually. So concurrently, we're trying to find a sawmill. But the biggest one we could find was actually way over the other side. But it was the only one that we could get. So we acquired it. But being the people that were perceived to have all the money, we had to pay significantly more and set about upgrading it. So at least we could start cutting down the trees and we could actually then start turning it into lumber and getting it to the market. But we then needed to figure out, how do we get the logs that are now cut and on the landing to the sawmill where they need to go? I hadn't learned my lesson because I decided to put another tender out for local trucking companies. We did the same thing. We put out a tender and we saw what came back, and they all colluded. We were able to do a deal with quite a major logging company based down in Mesa, and we brought him in to help. And then we thought at that stage, it's okay, this is a home run. But what a big mistake that one was. It turned out not to be a home run because we then started to encounter other problems. We're starting to corrupt the price of this stuff in the marketplace.
You're flooding it with supply.
Yes, we have some great shareholders, but they want their returns. So we started to come up with an idea of soils, literally cutting the branches down rather than leave them in the forest. You break them down, put them with other nitrogen, and you start coming up with a high quality soil that you find at Lowe's and etc. in bags. And this kept going and going and going. We were producing so much pine. Putting it on trucks was not happening. We needed to find a solution. Getting it onto rail trucks, that was the next thing. So it was a very interesting experience. Nobody liked us, pushing a ton of negative stories out into the press about us and this whole background, but we overcame it. It was a real education in how to take a business from nothing and deal with all the day-to-day challenges, which were massive challenges, as well as the small challenges in between, and turn it into a success.
For the most part, IAG represents businesses that are being acquired, and oftentimes we're finding strategic buyers In this case, you actually built a strategic company within the logging industry itself.
Mm.
So when you went out
Mm.
to acquire, you were the PE firm in a sense.
Yes, we were. We were the PE firm, but also, like everything, it has a shelf life.
And I imagine that gives you more insight today when you're on the other side of the fence representing companies who are going to be acquired. You understand what's happening on the other side of the buying fence, if you will,
Yeah,
what they're
I'm
looking for.
absolutely, and I consider myself to be very fortunate. I've sat in all three seats at many times, many
Mhm.
stages throughout the table. We're currently in the middle, Joe, as you know, in the middle seat. But it really does give us a good insight into how to position a seller, to become attracted to a buyer.
Well, that's quite a story, Martin, coming from the other side. Oftentimes feel like we're fighting against the buyers. In this case, you were building a shield for future wars and it was made out of wood, not metal. So you're very equipped for the future.
Yeah, and I liked it so much I never went home.
Well, that's a wonderful story, Martin. Thanks for sharing it and we'll see you soon.